Please turn with me to John chapter 9 and verse 1. John chapter 9, verse 1. I think I've mentioned this before, but I'm colorblind, and I discovered that I was colorblind. Thanks. I got one more. I saw one hand. Okay, a couple. Thank you. Appreciate that. Solidarity amongst the colorblind. I discovered it in seventh grade. I don't remember exactly what the class was, but it was in class. The teacher held up a couple of those images, right, with all the little dots, and said to the class, what do you see? And everybody goes, 74, 39, 26, right? And everybody sees, and I'm going, oh no, I see nothing like dots, right? And then she goes, are there any freaks in here who don't see anything? Any freaks? Raise your hand. No, she didn't say it like that, but if you're in seventh grade and you're the only one in the entire class who can't see the numbers, all you're seeing is just dots, it's like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me, there's something broken. Now, just to explain, I'm going to assume I saw a couple other hands that are also colorblind. That doesn't mean that we see necessarily the world in black and white and shades of gray. There is that. That's an extreme form of colorblindness. For me, I confuse reds and greens and browns. I just confuse those. Now, when my kids discovered this, they were appalled. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just like shock, dismay. Dad's broken. Dad's defective, and it was so troubling to them. And then as they got older, they did a little research, and they came to me one day and they said, Dad, you can buy glasses that will correct your freakishness, your broken, right? You can buy glasses. And I go, really? How much do they cost? They go, they don't cost much at all. I go, how much do you mean? They go, about $600. And I go, yeah, no. They go, well, we'll buy them for you. You don't have jobs. I know you don't. Oh, Dad, you got to get these glasses. You go, no, I choose to not perceive the world as it truly is. Right? I choose to not actually see the world as it actually is. That's my choice because I'm cheap. So I'm not going to pay $600. I'll just keep looking at the world as I see the world and remain joyfully, blissfully ignorant about the way the world actually is. I'm good with that. Now, before some of you begin to just feel like extreme pity or condescension toward the few of us who are colorblind, you're all freaks. Okay, I'm just going to tell you right now, all of you are blind in some way. None of you perceive the world as it actually truly is all the time, right? We see the world through the lens of ourselves, which is broken. So we don't see ourselves as we truly are. We don't see our friends perfectly as they truly are. We don't see our circumstances perfectly as they truly are. We don't see God as he actually is. But we look at the world and we see things aren't right and we need it to make sense, but we can't make sense of it without the Creator who sees all things perfectly showing us what is true. So we're going to look at the story this morning, John chapter 9, about the man born blind. And as we go through this story, the big idea is this. If you know you're blind, then Jesus can help you see. If you reject that reality, then you're going to stay in your blindness. And so I want you to think as we move our way through this story, who am I in this story? Who do I relate to in this story? Where am I in this process of illumination and actually seeing God and myself and others and life and circumstances as they truly are? And ask God to increasingly open the eyes of your heart so you can see him as he is. All right, let's read beginning John chapter 9 and verse 1. As Jesus passed by, having left the temple, he saw a man born blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind?" Jesus answered, "It was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him." When I was in high school, I was playing in a basketball game. I went up for a rebound, and I landed on another player's foot, and I rolled my ankle. And you could hear it in the gym. I mean, it just popped. I twisted it really, really bad. And I promise you, I don't think I'd even hit the ground before I began thinking in my mind, what did I do wrong? Not what did I do wrong, like I came down his ankle, but did I sin this week? Is there unconfessed sin in my life? I'm just starting to kind of walk with the Lord, but I promise you, that was right where my mind went immediately. I must have done something wrong because bad things happen when we do bad things, right? That's just how the universe works and how things are put together. And that thinking is very much embedded in us, even if we don't acknowledge it all the time. Well, that's exactly where the disciples go. They see a man who is born blind. And they say, well, he must have sinned in the womb, or his parents sinned that he would be born blind. There's a simple cause and effect here. And that kind of thinking permeated the culture in Jesus' day, permeates the culture in our day. We want to put life together. We want to make it simple. There was a rabbi who wrote shortly after the time of Jesus, and he said this: "There is no death without sin, and there is no suffering without iniquity." If you suffer, it's because you did something wrong. That's the story of Job. And Job's comforters, who are terrible comforters, right? They come to him and they say, "Well, Job, you're suffering. You must have sinned. Just confess it to God so that the blessing can return." And Job's like, "You guys stink. You're terrible friends. I haven't sinned." And then we have to put up with 40 chapters of them trying to convince Job that he's sinned, and Job trying to convince them that he hasn't sinned. I mean, it's just this terrible dialogue that goes back and forth. And Jesus interrupts the disciples and he says, "Hold on a minute. Life isn't always just that simple." And Jesus doesn't deny that sometimes we have bad consequences in our lives because we have sinned. Chapter 5, he finds the man that he had healed previously from his lameness, and he finds him, and Jesus says, "Hey, don't sin anymore so that nothing worse may befall you." Right? So sometimes our sin creates bad consequences. That is true. But not always. And sometimes unrighteous people actually prosper, and we look at them and we go, "I don't know what to do with that." We can't make sense of it. But we want to make sense of it. We're trying to make sense of it. And Jesus says, not that suffering is good or bad circumstances are good. He doesn't try and reframe it in a ridiculous manner. He's just saying this can be redeemed. And God can use the brokenness of this man, and that's what God is going to do for his glory. God's going to show off through this man's brokenness and weakness. Now, here's the one of the difficult truths of this passage. The hardest moments in life usually don't come with an explanation, but with an opportunity for deeper trust. We want an explanation, and sometimes we try to give ourselves or others an explanation, but often the hardest moments in life don't come with an explanation. They come with an opportunity for deeper trust. Now, this is a long story, and we're going to dig into the whole thing, and I warned Trey that I'm going to take all of my time today, and then maybe some, because there's just so much rich imagery and background that will help us understand the story. So we're going to start with the setting. We are, in this stage in John's gospel, in the middle of the festival season. So remember the fall festival season. Remember there was a set of spring festivals, and then 40 days, and then Pentecost, and then the summer, and we're now in the fall festival season. The Feast of Tabernacles, sometimes called the Feast of Booths or Sukkot in Hebrew, has just ended. And we're about to enter into the Feast of Dedication, right? So we're right in that period of time. And that's the background, that's the setting, and Jesus is in Jerusalem. Now, the Feast of Sukkot or Tabernacles commemorated the dedication of Solomon's temple, where the glory of God came into the temple or into the tabernacle, and the people experienced God's glory. So listen to this description from 2 Chronicles 7. Now when Solomon had finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. The priest could not enter into the house of the Lord because the glory of the Lord filled the Lord's house. They couldn't even go in because God's stunning beauty and power and majesty is in this place, and it's visible, but it's also physical, and they can't go in. And this festival commemorated that, God's glory dwelling among his people. And it also anticipated that God would again bring his glory into the temple, and he would restore all things. And so this Feast of Tents or Tabernacles was a figure of the coming kingdom, the Messianic kingdom where God set all things right, and God dwelled among his people forever and ever and ever. Now, John has already told us that Jesus is the tabernacle, that he is God in human flesh, John chapter 1, and he is tabernacling or dwelling amongst us. Jesus has already said that his body is the temple. And so he's going to draw on the rich imagery of this festival season to point them to himself, to show that he's the fulfillment, he's the culmination, he's the reason that God embedded all of these practices in Israel so that they would be drawn ultimately to God's Son, Messiah. Now, the first image that he draws from is the image of water. I want you to turn back just 2 chapters to chapter 7 and verse 37. John 7, verse 37. Now on the last day, the great day of the feast, so we're in the fall. This is the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. On the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and he cried out, saying, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for the Spirit was not yet given because Jesus was not yet glorified." So here's the background. On the Feast of Tabernacles, it was a 7-day feast. And every day, the priest would lead a procession down to the pool of Siloam. So just picture this in a sense geographically. You've got the Temple Mount, and then there was a southern exit through the water gate. Okay, so just lock these ideas in your mind. You go down through that water gate, and then through the city of David. So the city of David was constructed. David made his home just below the temple on a ridge. Kidron Valley here, Tyropean Valley here. There was a spring up here called the Gihon Spring in the Kidron Valley, and it would flow down past the city of David, and it would collect in the pool of Siloam, just south of David's city or David's home. So the priest would lead a procession. They'd go down to the pool of Siloam, which is going to be the same pool where Jesus sends this man, and he'd take a golden pitcher, and he'd fill up the golden pitcher, and then the procession would go back up into the temple to the altar. And as they went back up into the temple, they would sing Isaiah 12, verse 3, "With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation." With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. Water is a picture of salvation. It's a fall festival. They needed the rain, so it was agricultural, but it was also spiritual. It was a picture of God giving them life. And so they would go up, and they would sing, and they would sing about God's salvation, and they would pour out the water as an offering to the Lord. On the 7th day, the great day of the feast, they would walk around the altar 7 times, singing about God's salvation and the imagery of water. And in the midst of that, Jesus stands up and he says, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink." Did you want water that actually gives you life? Come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. The innermost being is the being of Jesus. It's not us. From Jesus' innermost being, from his belly, from his life will flow life. So Jesus says, "Come to me and drink." And then John gives us commentary. This is what he's speaking of the Spirit. The Spirit wasn't yet given. The Spirit who regenerates, the Spirit who gives life. And Jesus says, you're going to get that from me, and you can get it from no other source. So Jesus is using this imagery of water to draw them to himself. It's an image that is throughout the Old Testament. One of the most vivid places is in Zechariah chapter 14. It says, "In that day, living waters will flow out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea and the other half toward the western sea. It will be in summer as well as in winter, and the Lord will be king over all the earth. And in that day, the Lord will be the only one, and his name, the only one." When God comes and he reestablishes his kingdom on earth and he sets all things right, the earth will erupt at this place under the temple, we're told, Ezekiel chapter 47. I've given you a few references if you want to go look those up. And the water will come out from underneath the temple. John says Jesus is the temple. He is the source of life. He is the water, and Jesus is pointing them to himself. Now, hold your place here in John and turn to the book of Revelation, chapter 21 and verse 1. Revelation chapter 21 and verse 1. "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there's no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away.' And he who sits on the throne said, 'Behold, I am making all things new.' And he said, 'Write, for these words are faithful and true.' Then he said to me, 'It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of the water of life without cost.'" You can't earn it. You don't deserve it. But I want to give it to you. This is a reformation of the experience of the garden, where Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the day, and the waters flooded the garden, and they ate and had abundance physically, emotionally, spiritually. Jesus says, all things will be set new. And this festival is anticipating that. It's prefiguring that. In the middle of it, Jesus says, "Come to me if you're thirsty. There's nowhere else that you can get the water of life that you need." Now, turn back to John chapter 9 again. The second image that Jesus draws from here is the image of light. Every evening during the 7-day festival, there were 4 huge lanterns in the court of the women that they would light. And it said that it would illuminate all of Jerusalem. It's huge, these fires going, lighting up the city of Jerusalem. And the people would dance, and they would sing, and they would celebrate. So it was a festival of light and of joy, of God's salvation. In the middle of that setting, Jesus stands up and says this, "I'm the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life." So you see what Jesus is doing? He's talking about bread. He's talking about blood. He's talking about water. He's talking about light. If you eat the bread, it says, yeah, that means you believe in me. You receive life from me. If you drink my blood, that means you believe in me. You receive life from me. If you drink the water, that means you believe in me. You receive life from me. If you see the light, that means you believe in me. You receive light from me. You see the world as it actually is. You see yourself as it actually is. And now you understand who God is, who I am, and what life is all about. Jesus is using all of these images to point to himself. He reinforces them with miracles. And then he makes a bold statement here at the end of chapter 8. Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am." And of course, the leadership picked up stones to stone him for blasphemy because he's saying, "I am the eternally existent God. I am Yahweh. I am God. And there is no other life outside of me. God has life in himself, and he can give life to us. But we can't find life any other place. And so he says, come to me. Come to me. And throughout the Gospel of John, what we're watching is how do people respond to Jesus? John's one of the few books in the entire Bible that actually has a purpose statement, which is really helpful. This is why he wrote. It says, therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ or the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. John says, this is why I wrote what I wrote, so that you would find life in Jesus. And so as we go through this particular miracle, I want you to ask yourself, where am I in this journey of seeing? And who do I identify with in this story? Am I blind? Am I fearful? Am I confused? Am I prideful? Or am I growing in my insight and my acceptance of who Jesus is? Okay, so let's read again. Now we can dig into the story a little bit more, okay? Let's dig in. Chapter 9, verse 1. Let's read again. It says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from his birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied the clay to his eyes. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went away and washed, and he came back seeing. So, first question, are you blind? The answer is yes. You were born blind. I was born blind. We're all born blind. We don't understand life as it actually is. Now think about this man's condition for just a moment. Born blind. He'd never been able to work. His parents, when he got old enough, had parked him by the temple so he could beg because he was a drain on them financially. In the worldview of the people around, he had sinned in the womb, maybe, or his parents had sinned. But there's a curse on him. Clearly, why? Because bad things happen to bad people or bad people from bad families. He's socially isolated, pretty difficult to have friends. He knew that he was broken. He knew that he was helpless. He couldn't fix his blindness. No one else had ever been able to fix his blindness. And so then one day Jesus comes up and he spits on the ground and he makes clay. And this is really interesting. It's unusual. This isn't how Jesus usually heals. Jesus often will just tell somebody, stand up and walk, take up your pallet, right? Or he might lay hands on someone. This may be the only miracle where Jesus makes clay and then it applies it to his eyes. Because this was not a restoration of something that the man had had previously. This is an act of creation out of nothing. Okay, he was blind and had never seen, and now he can see. It's creation out of nothing. And so Jesus does this act that they considered as an act of creation. He makes mud or he makes clay and applies it to the man's eyes. Now, notice again what it says here. He said to him, now, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. John included that translation for a very specific purpose. He didn't want his Gentile readers to miss the illusion here, to miss the point. During that feast and festival, where did the priests go? They went to the pool of Siloam, or the pool called Sent. That pool was named after Jacob's prediction in Genesis 49, verse 10. Okay? Genesis 49, verse 10, Jacob makes a prophecy about each of his 12 sons. And when he gets to Judah, he says, the scepter will not depart from Judah. That is, Judah will be the one from whom the ruler will come over the family, and if God's promises are true, not just over Israel, but over the world and all nations. The scepter will not depart from the tribe of Judah until Shiloach comes, or until Siloam comes, until the sent one comes. This was considered a name for or description of Messiah, right? Messiah is coming. Genesis 49, verse 10, the sent one. Now, check this out. 45 times in the Gospel of John, Jesus is referred to as the sent one. 45 times. So, here's what we have. The sent one sends the blind man to the pool called Sent so he can come back seeing. And no one else can do that for him. No one else can create out of nothing. Jesus creates sight for him out of nothing. Now, here's the hard truth again, so to speak. This man's blindness was a blessing. Let that sink in for a moment. This man's blindness was a blessing. Because he knew he was blind, he was completely willing to accept Jesus' help. And he obeyed Jesus' instructions, and he didn't resist because he knew he was helpless. His blindness turned out to be a blessing. Now, you have blindnesses, you have deficiencies, you have brokenness in your life, you have choices that you've made that have harmed you, you have choices that other people have made that have harmed you. You've got things in your life that have been difficult, not just circumstances, but it might be physical and it might be financial. Now, I'm not saying that all those things are good in any respect, but what I'm saying is God can be glorified in those things. If you say, yes, I'm blind, I'm broken, I'm deficient, please, God, use all of those things for your honor and for your glory. Then he can. Listen to Paul's words in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And Jesus said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Remember, Paul said, Jesus, please take away my brokenness, take away this thorn in my flesh. And we all say, well, that thorn is the thing that I struggle with. It doesn't matter really what the thorn is. But man, we identify, because I got thorns. And Paul asked, and he asked, and he asked, and finally Jesus said, you can stop asking now. Because my grace is sufficient for you, because power is perfected in weakness. Paul, I'm going to let you stay weak. Because when you're weak, you know you've got to go somewhere else for strength other than yourself. You're not strong. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses. Paul says, I embrace it so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Are you blind? Yes, you're blind. Do you accept that? If you accept it, then Jesus can help you see. If you fight against it, then you stay in the blindness. That's a hard truth, but when you begin to live this reality, you begin to see God's power and strength through even your brokenness and your deficiencies. Now, second, are you confused? Verse 8, chapter 9. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously saw him as a beggar were saying, is not this the one who used to sit and beg? Others were saying, this is he. Still others were saying, no, but he's like him. He just looks like him. And he kept saying, I'm the one. So they were saying to him, how then were your eyes open? He answered, the man who is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went away and washed, and I received my sight. And they said to him, where is he? He goes, I don't know. I've only been able to see for a couple hours here. Come on. Can't we just celebrate? No, we're going to interrogate. Because they can't make sense of their world. They've never even heard of somebody who was born blind, now able to see, let alone seeing a genuine miracle like this. So some say, well, we've been around him our entire lives. We know it's him. We just can't explain it. Others go, well, it just can't be him. It's just a guy who looks, just another blind man who looks like him, but he wasn't really blind. What do you do with this? And they're genuinely confused. So where do you go when you're confused about life? Well, they go to the spiritual leaders, which turns out to be a bad choice. But this is where they go, verse 13. So they brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. Now, it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also were asking him again how he received his sight, and he said to them, he applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. But others were saying, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man again, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? And he said, he's a prophet, I guess. He must be a prophet. And they can't really figure it out, so they have this debate and this discussion, this argument. So again, where do you turn when you can't make life make sense? Well, when we're little, we turn to our parents. They've got all the answers. And even though as parents we know we don't. And as kids you get a little older, you realize, maybe I need some other sources. And you ask teachers, and then you ask your friends, There's a fountain of wisdom, 7th grade. that'll help. So you go to your friends, and you go to professors later in college, and you get books, and man, get online. Now you got AI, golly, fountain of collected, integrated wisdom and knowledge and truth. But ultimately, where we go is we go to ourselves, right? We are our own ultimate arbiter of truth. How do I think and feel about that? Problem is, as we're trying to interpret life, we're seeing it through our own brokenness. And so we will remain confused. Because ultimately, only the Creator knows. So where do you go? And are you conscious of where you go when life doesn't make sense for you? Third, are you fearful? Verse 18. The Jews then did not believe it of him. The Jews being a label for the spiritual leadership, the Pharisees. They did not believe it of him that he had been blind and had received sight until they called the parents of the very one who had received his sight, and they questioned them, saying, is this your son who you say was born blind? Then how did he see? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son, and we know that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself. Now his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed Jesus to be the Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, he is of age, ask of him. They throw their son under the bus. They don't stand up for him. They don't stand with him. For them, he has been, in a sense, a source of shame their entire lives because he reflects either his own sin in the womb or their sin and failure. They're probably right on the edge of being social outcasts already, and what they want is they don't want to lose any more social status. They choose their social status and social standing over their loyalty and commitment to their own flesh and blood, to their son. Now, if you choose to follow Jesus, it will cost you. Right now, you might be surrounded by this incredible Christian community that's just cheering on every decision you make for Jesus. But at some point in time in your life, in your following of Jesus, you will have to pay a price with friends or with family or with a job that doesn't align with your worldview, that Jesus is your Savior and He's your Creator and your Redeemer. And at that point in time, you're going to have to ask yourself, so what do I love more than Jesus? What's holding me back? What am I afraid of losing if I stay loyal to Jesus Christ? Is it worth it to say, I'm with Christ no matter what? Just a couple chapters later, John records this, nevertheless, many even of the rulers believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they were not confessing him for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the approval of men rather than the approval of God. Wow. Whose approval do you want most? Fourth category, are you proud? Verse 24. So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man, Jesus, is a sinner. He then answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. Mic drop. Boom. Look, man, I was blind, now I see. You call him a sinner, call him whatever you want. I've never experienced sight, and now I have perfect vision. I promise you Jesus didn't heal him and he had cataracts. Like he has perfect, he wasn't colorblind either. Sorry, Felix. I mean, he just perfectly healed. So they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Now, by this point in time, he's feeling a bit frustrated. He answered them, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why? Do you want to hear it again? You do not want to become his disciples, do you? I love that, right? So, I mean, he's blind, but he's not stupid, right? I mean, the dude, he is sharp, right? He just, you want to become his disciples? Is that what you're asking? They reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he is from. The man answered and he said to them, well, here is an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from. And yet, he opened my eyes. We all know, that God does not hear sinners. But if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears him. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born entirely in your sins, and are you teaching us? So they put him out. In other words, they go, oh yeah? Get out of here. I mean, the guy just runs circles around them logically and theologically, just ties them up in knots. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing, but clearly he's done something, therefore he must be from God. And the Pharisees just cannot accept it, and they get harder and harder and harder and harder, ultimately crucifying Jesus. Why? Because they're proud. They see themselves as the ultimate arbiters of truth. They get to tell people, this is how life works. This is who God is. This is how God sees you. This is how you should see life. This is how you put all of the pieces together. And in particular, they managed the culture with all of their Sabbath rules. And they were frustrated with Jesus because they said Jesus doesn't keep or guard the Sabbath. And that wasn't because they were worried about God's honor and glory, but he didn't guard or keep their right to make decisions and to rule and have authority over the people. So it's really important how Jesus did this miracle. First, if you read through the Gospels, notice that most of the miracles, it seems that Jesus did, he did on the Sabbath. Why? Because he's poking the Pharisees in the eye all the time. He's just jabbing at them because they have this concept that what God cares about most is keeping the rules, because that's what God is like. And Jesus is like, that's not what God is like. God loves people. Why would we not do good on the Sabbath? You get to pull an oxen out of a pit. Why wouldn't I heal a man and do good on the Sabbath, right? That's what God is like. He cares more about the relationship than the rules. So he's always doing these miracles on the Sabbath over and over and over again, just jabbing at them. And then this one in particular, he doesn't just say to the man, receive sight. He makes mud, right? That's an act of creation. It violates at least two commandments. One, you couldn't do any kneading on the Sabbath, right? So you couldn't make bread. It's a work on the Sabbath. You've got to rest. But the second was, he doesn't just knead, but he makes earth. He makes mud. So it was actually a sin. It was a Sabbath violation. If you accidentally spit on the Sabbath and your spit hit the ground and made mud, that's a sin. And you had to go and offer a sacrifice for your sin. So Jesus goes, hey, watch this. Okay? And it was a sin to anoint on the Sabbath. It's a third violation. The man comes back, and he's singing, and they don't have a category for that because he's violating their concept of who God is, and so they say he must be a sinner. The problem is, one of the signs of Messiah coming was that the blind would receive their sight. Isaiah 35. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will shout for joy. For waters will break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. when John the Baptist was confused because bad things only happen to bad people, right? John was confused because he's the prophet, the forerunner of Messiah, but he's sitting in prison. Pretty miserable. It's a Roman prison. He's like, okay, why are we not in the palace? Why are we not usurping Roman authority? Why are we not booting out the Pharisees? Instead, I'm in prison. And John is confused because bad things happen to bad people, but I'm the prophet of the king. I'm a good guy. I'm a righteous guy, right? So he doesn't understand. Could Jesus actually maybe not be the Messiah? So he sends some of his disciples, go to Jesus and tell him, are you the one? Or did I miss it? Should we look for someone else? And you know what Jesus does? He quotes Isaiah chapter 35. Quotes Isaiah 35. This is a sign that Jesus is the Messiah, and the Pharisees know that, and they just can't put the pieces together. So they say, you know what? The only way we can reconcile this is just say, he must be a deceiver of the people, and he's doing this miracle by the power of the devil. And he needs to be killed. And they dig in because they're proud. And they can't just stop and say, you know what? Maybe we're a little bit blind. Maybe we don't actually see life as it actually is. Maybe we can learn something here about who God is and how God thinks and how God feels. Are you learning to see? Verse 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out of the synagogue. And finding him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Which is a title for the Messiah. He answered, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, because now you can see. And he is the one who is talking with you." And he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Those of the Pharisees who were with him at that point in time heard these things and said to him, "We are not blind too, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say we see, your sin remains. If you can acknowledge, I can't see, then Jesus can heal your blindness. If you say I can see, then Jesus can't do anything for you." This man believes in it. Notice, it's not that he understands it all just like immediately. It's progressive. Initially, he just said, well, it was this man everybody calls Jesus. Maybe he'd sat in the temple and heard him teach or heard about him, heard people talking, hadn't engaged with Jesus before. He goes, but that man that people call Jesus. And then later he goes, well, I guess he's the prophet, maybe a prophet, maybe the prophet Moses talked about. And then he realizes, well, he must be righteous and he must be sent from God. And then when he sees Jesus face to face, he falls down and worships. And I would argue he understands something about who Jesus is even long before the disciples did, because he worships. And only God is worthy of worship. He understands this is God, who can create out of nothing, who can create sight where there's blindness, who can create life where there was death. And he worships. So, question for us to wrestle through is this: where are you in the story? Where are you in the process? The question that leads you to greater understanding and sight is not Jesus, prove yourself. It's Jesus, help me see. So we all have areas of blindness. Maybe for you, it's you've never seen for the first time. Maybe you need to come this morning to Jesus and say, I'm a sinner. I'm blind. I don't see. Please forgive my sins. The moment that you do that, your debt of sin is removed, and you have life that lasts forever. So maybe you need to come to Jesus that first time. Maybe there are areas of life where you need to see Jesus at work, and you need to say, okay, I don't like these parts of my circumstances, and I can't make sense of these parts of my circumstances, but I believe and I trust that Jesus can do beautiful things in my life and through my life, through these areas of my life that are broken and hurting.